Tonight, a critical stage in the coronavirus fight. The PM says things are working, but still more precautions are needed. A new quarantine crackdown, overseas arrivals put into mandatory hotel lockdown, the Army on duty to enforce the rules. Exclusive details, another cruise ship shock, hundreds wade through into Sydney and on their way unchecked. Getting tough, cracking down on businesses breaking the rules. Police patrols for social distancing defiers. A $750 million package to help local businesses and save jobs. Positions vacant, 20,000 new jobs. A helping hand, the battle to feed families and the elderly. $80 million richer, the retiree who really needed the Powerball break. And the NRL star who wants out of the Dragons.
Live from our Sydney headquarters, this is 7 News with Mark Ferguson.
Good evening. Australians arriving home from overseas will now be forced into mandatory quarantine, with thousands of hotel rooms set aside to house them. The tough new rules were announced by the Prime Minister, who stopped short of ordering a tighter nationwide lockdown. It came as cases across New South Wales rose again, up by another 186 to a total of 1,405. The Army is now being brought in to help enforce the new orders.
It was as easy as filling in this Corona declaration form. But from midnight tomorrow, incoming passengers now face instant quarantine detention.
By no later than midnight tomorrow, that's 11:59 p.m, states and territories will be quarantining all arrivals.
All returning Australians now to go straight from the airport and into a hotel at the city they arrive in, even if it's not their own. And the government will help make sure they stay there.
By providing members of the Australian Defence Force to assist in the compliance with these arrangements.
The Army, despite having no powers to arrest, will also help police in home quarantine.
The ADF will be there to put boots on the ground.
The extraordinary decision made in a National Cabinet video conference in which the Premiers of New South Wales and Victoria had threatened to go it alone and launch lockdowns.
Stage 3 will come. It is not here yet. When it is, I'll take you through.
Our Premier still insists it could come, and at short notice.
If New South Wales has to do more very quickly, we will.
But the refusal to go into lockdown is outraging those on the front line, our doctors.
We are all really worried.
Intensive care specialist Dr. Greg Kelly has a petition signed by 15,000 health professionals with fears even plans to double and triple our ICU beds won't be enough.
We should go hard, go now and go smart. Go to a full lockdown.
We know we are in the middle of a pandemic, but we haven't hit the peak yet, and I'm very concerned at the availability of ICU beds.
The state's corona cases jumped again today to 1,405, but the increase of 186 was the lowest in days.
So the numbers we are seeing diagnosed today reflect the behaviours of people 7 to 14 days ago.
In other words, they don't take into account the behaviour changes so far, like the 70% drop in commuters on public transport. Workplace practices changed, like face masks at work. Even this, an Uber driver with what he calls an antiviral protection screen.
AKA it's a shower screen from Bunnings.
Among the new cases, a doctor at Bathurst Hospital, 2 visiting Chilean Navy officers, 2 back from a wedding in Bali, and 2 more from a Star Casino restaurant. But the one figure causing deep concern, infections with no known source.
That means the virus is starting to spread in the community without us knowing exactly where, and that is a concern.
And Chris Reason joins me now. Chris, the Premier says those tighter lockdown laws could be brought in at any time. Are they likely this weekend?
Good evening to you, Mark. Well, it all comes down to what the Premier is calling her threshold numbers. How many cases, especially of that last figure she spoke about, infections with no known source. Either way, though, it's unlikely the state government would move before the next meeting of the National Cabinet, and that is due on Sunday. They are warning, though, they will trickle out more restrictions on people's movements throughout this weekend. But if you're looking for an example of just how virulent this disease can be, 2 of the 3 people who died in Victoria yesterday were cancer patients at the Alfred Hospital. The oncology ward there has now been closed down, with 2 more patients being tested positive, as well as 3 medical staff. Mark?
Chris Reason, thank you. Only hours before the Prime Minister clamped down at our airports, dozens of cruise ship passengers roamed through Sydney Airport before being set free across the country, as travellers from a sister ship remain under guard at a Sydney hotel that they describe as a prison.
From a busy check-in queue in Johannesburg onto a packed Qantas flight and then to Western Sydney via Uber. Swerving the strict hotel lockdown imposed on sister ship Norwegian Jewel, 7 News can reveal these Norwegian Spirit passengers arrived in Australia from South Africa this morning unchecked.
I was surprised to see that duty-free were open and people were in there without face masks on when people are walking through.
It must seem like a real double standard.
I don't think that people here either are really taking it as seriously as it possibly should be at this time.
The difference between the two cruise ships couldn't be more stark. Those from the Norwegian Spirit this morning allowed to go home free. Meanwhile, 300 almost from the Norwegian Jewel yesterday are still locked in isolation here. And the residents living above them aren't happy.
And now they've been brought into our households and exposing our elderly in this building so unnecessarily. And the government needs to come forward and respond to us. But look out there.
This is the view from the residents' units and this from the passengers' rooms directly underneath.
The windows are locked shut to stop you from throwing this food out the window. I think that's what it is. If this is supposed to be that we're infected with something, we don't have anything to eat out of it via these containers, and this is left on the carpet outside our door.
Your kitchen's all fully stocked and you're ready to go for the weekend?
We're very lucky to have very good neighbours who have stocked up our place for us. It's funny actually, I haven't sorted out whether there's enough chips and chocolate yet.
The COVID cruise ship scandal is deepening. Now 162 confirmed cases from the Ruby Princess. We've obtained New South Wales health records that show paramedics are treating a number of Ruby Princess passengers daily, including 2 male passengers this afternoon suffering shortness of breath, dry mouth and lethargy.
My wife's down to 2 more pills on her blood pressure. And we were waiting for the medical staff to come here yesterday. Nobody showed up.
And Evan Batten is at the overseas passenger terminal for us tonight. Evan, what's been the response from the cruise company?
Well, Mark, it certainly seems these are the forgotten cruise ship passengers. Norwegian Cruise Lines tells us that they chartered flights for other passengers on that cruise to Amsterdam, Miami and London. But the Sydney-bound passengers, they were left to buy their own tickets to fend for themselves. We've asked for a response from the Premier's office, New South Wales Health and Border Force to explain why these passengers today weren't put into a hotel for quarantine like their counterparts on the Norwegian Jewel yesterday. Mark, so far, there's been no response.
OK, Evan Batten at Circular Quay, thank you. The Prime Minister says coronavirus will have devastating consequences for many of our near neighbours, and Australia has a special responsibility to help them. Alongside Scott Morrison today, the Chief Medical Officer warned community transmission in Australia is now a major worry.
Australia's social and economic shutdown, heartbreaking, and yet in the face of a pandemic, it's also an early triumph.
Thank you, Australia. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, he says, for cutting movement in our major cities by 2/3 in just the last week, 80% in the last fortnight.
Simply magnificent.
Though, as Australia's COVID-19 cases cross 3,000...
We are worried. We are worried about the growth.
The Chief Medical Officer warns...
But we have to very closely watch this community transmission. That's our biggest concern at the moment.
Might that fear lead to a new, tougher lockdown on shops, schools and places Australians congregate?
You better be ready to do it for 6 months. And because at what point do you pull it back?
This as the government finalises a 3rd round of economic stimulus and protection measures. To be announced in the next few days, they'll include a plan for businesses to hibernate, given a holiday from bills and rent through the economy's shutdown.
We want Australia to rise again on the other side of this and to go forward strongly.
Today's National Cabinet was the Prime Minister's 2nd high-level video conference in 24 hours. The first, a unique world leaders meeting. The G20 announces cooperation on work towards a coronavirus vaccine.
China will be more than ready to share our good practices, conduct joint research and develop drugs and vaccines.
As well, the leaders talked up a combined $5 trillion effort to stimulate a deeply troubled world economy.
And we should brace ourselves, I think, for some very devastating images around the world.
It's feared many will come from our Asian and Pacific neighbours. Tim Lester, 7 News.
The owner and 3 staff members from a city massage parlour have been fined a total of $8,000 for allegedly operating in breach of the coronavirus lockdown. Police say tough new rules on venues and self-isolation are designed to save lives and they'll be strictly enforced.
Throughout the CBD and along Sydney's beaches, police are on patrol looking for anyone breaching tough new public health orders. Some businesses are staying open when they're meant to be closed. A massage parlour on Sussex Street was the first to cop fines for ignoring coronavirus shutdowns. The owner penalised $5,000, 3 staff $1,000 each.
We will maintain public safety in the state of New South Wales.
In Newcastle, Joanne McAnally, recently returned from overseas, was fined for breaching her 14-day isolation. The 65-year-old dobbed in by locals around Redhead for allegedly repeatedly being out and about.
If you've been told by the police to stay home, please stay home.
Our problem is a lack of understanding. We should have known better, but we didn't. So I'd like to apologise to everybody and say we haven't put anybody at risk.
Tip-offs to Crime Stoppers have been coming thick and fast since the government unveiled tighter restrictions. 800 calls so far, thousands more online. That means a lot of work for officers. Police are now going through these thousands of calls to determine which businesses or individuals might be breaching the new rules. They say compliance checks will continue until everyone gets the message.
The police will continue to turn up, will continue to protect you. We're going to get through this and minimise the loss of lives.
But only if people start following rules they've never had to before.
Just move back, you're not losing your space.
And Andrew Denny is at Auburn Police Station, where there's been a development in another case of coronavirus crime. Andrew, we first reported this on Tuesday. Now police have made an arrest in that toilet paper theft.
That's right. Police have arrested one of the men suspected of being responsible for those toilet paper heists that took place in Sydney earlier this week. This afternoon, police arrested a 30-year-old man nearby. They took him here to Auburn Police Station, where he is expected to be charged with larceny offences. It follows a public appeal where police released security video of 2 men who wandered into the loading docks of 4 supermarkets in Western Sydney, helping themselves to mountains of toilet paper while the panic buying of that reached its peak. A bail decision here is yet to be made, although police hope the man they have in custody will roll on his accomplice.
OK, Andrew, thank you. More jobs, relief for small business and cash for charities. That's the state government's promise, announcing another stimulus package, this time worth $750 million. It came as Woolies advertised 20,000 new jobs to help combat the growing numbers of unemployed.
In the line of fire, dozens of workers joined the queue to the unknown at Centrelink this morning. They join the thousands of New South Wales workers that have already lost their jobs, and with tighter restrictions looming, the numbers are set to grow. The state government this morning firing back with more cash.
This is all about keeping as many people in jobs and as many businesses in business.
The Stage 2 COVID-19 stimulus package is worth an extra $750 million to be spent helping businesses create jobs and retraining workers. Gaming tax will be held off for 6 months to help pubs and clubs keep staff. Small businesses won't have to pay rent on government properties for 6 months. There's $34 million for the homeless and $6 million for Lifeline. Just last week, Service New South Wales hired 1,000 workers to assist with new government roles like cleaning trains and buses. But how do people apply?
We'll also be setting up a portal through Service New South Wales for these jobs.
Supermarket giant Woolworths is stepping up its efforts to ease unemployment. 20,000 job offers nationwide, nearly 6,000 in New South Wales. Positions that will be predominantly offered to workers stood down from companies like Qantas, Village Cinemas and Accor Hotels.
What we'd encourage them to do is to go to a store, their local store, take a personal identification with them as well as their right to work.
Then there are businesses like the Odeon Pizza Theatre here in Hornsby. While they have received government assistance, it's just not enough. So the owner has decided to run online promotions and sell gift cards, but not to pay his bills, but to pay his staff.
Last year I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and my staff really helped me out. And now I'm feeling better. It's my opportunity to give something back to them.
I think it's great. I'm stoked.
It's business owners like Dave helping keep small business in the big picture. Peter Fegan, 7 News.
It's been another rough ride on the stock market, with the gains of the last few days wiped out. Australian shares closed more than 5% down today, a sign of the deepening economic and health crisis.
It didn't last long. Australian stocks diving again today. This week's bounce back reversed by coronavirus fears.
These big up movements are a normal part of a falling market because it doesn't fall in just one line.
As money is being poured into huge stimulus packages around the world.
It looks like the total fiscal stimulus being delivered by governments around the world is more than $10 trillion.
It didn't save our stocks falling today, among them the big miners, including BHP. Resources helped pull Australia out of the global financial crisis, but after a trade war, China might not come to our rescue now.
I suspect that China will, as most nations will do, will look after its own citizens first and think about the globe later.
After being boosted by recent panic buying, the big supermarkets fell in trading today. Any future lockdowns could make that slide even worse.
With a lockdown, some of that non-essential shopping will probably be deferred into the future.
A much harder market to predict has meant those who do it themselves, like many self-funded retirees, now seeking advice, particularly men worried about their partners. Investment managers say they're receiving a spike in calls because of coronavirus having a higher mortality rate with males.
I'm worried that if something happens to me, whether I die or have a stroke, she would be left in a difficult position.
After a week buoyed by green, ended in red. Chris Marr, 7.
America now has the most known cases of COVID-19 in the world, overtaking China and Italy. The number of positive tests has soared beyond 85,000 and the country's predicted peak is still weeks away. One New York doctor wants the world to see inside her hospital, where she lost 13 patients in just one day.
A chilling glimpse of America's Frontline.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID.
A doctor hosting an emergency room tour, calling her own hospital apocalyptic.
We had to get a refrigerated truck to store the bodies of patients who are dying.
A human tragedy that's sweeping through the nation. The United States today reaching a grim milestone, surpassing Italy and China in the number infected.
It's a tribute to the amount of testing that we're doing. We're doing tremendous testing. And I'm sure you're not able to tell what China is testing or not testing.
The American numbers speak for themselves. More than 80,000 infected, almost half in New York. The southern state of Louisiana showing the fastest growth in the world.
The life you save could be your own. And all that you have to do to save lives is stay home.
With the US economy placed in a coma to fight this health crisis, the country was bracing for catastrophic job losses. A record 3.3 million Americans filing for unemployment benefits last week alone.
They're fully expected numbers, at least. I think you'll see a very fast turnaround once we have a victory over the hidden enemy.
A victory that after today seems further out of reach.
I don't really care if I get in trouble. People are dying.
In Washington, D.C., Ashley Mullaney, 7 News.
A high-speed hospital train is being used to transport coronavirus patients across France as a makeshift mobile emergency department. It's one of several moves governments across Europe have devised to try to deal with this growing crisis.
On a platform in Strasbourg, the only passengers are patients. A high-speed train now transport for critical coronavirus victims. The restaurant car is a medical operations centre. Stretchers replace seats. Another example of governments scrambling for solutions as Europe's combined death toll surpassed 15,500. Italy accounting for more than half after another big spike in deaths and cases.
This is not the most dangerous place. The most dangerous place is outside.
Britain is preparing for war. London City Airport is set to become RAF Nightingale, open only to military aircraft. Next door is the new 4,000-bed Nightingale Hospital being built fast. The military will help the NHS run the temporary hospital, which is due to open next week, and it could be the first of many, with officials looking to convert another 10 sites across the country. For those on the front line, the battle is relentless, but their efforts are valued. In a moment of national unity, millions took to their streets, windows and balconies, thanking the UK's doctors and nurses, the Cambridge kids among them, with their grandfather, Prince Charles, in isolation. This, the first glimpse of the future king since testing positive to the virus. The enemy this country too is striving to overcome. In London, Sarah Greenolch, 7 News.
A bushfire survivor from Port Macquarie who has been in self-isolation is Australia's newest multi-millionaire after taking home last night's entire Powerball jackpot. He says he plans to share his $80 million windfall with his family and will shout himself a new TV. The retiree says the coronavirus outbreak won't stop him celebrating his good fortune. We'll have more on COVID-19 very soon, and the latest will bring you any developments after 7 p.m. Then our next news bulletin is just after 9:30 tonight. But now time to check on Sydney's weather with Angie Asimus. Angie, we ended up with a fairly warm afternoon.
Mark, good evening. Yes, very warm at times out in the sunshine. We ended up with a top of 23.9 degrees in the CBD. Fair bit warmer than yesterday. Penrith, though, didn't make it past 21.8. Despite all this patchy cloud cover, the showers eased significantly today. Really only just a few light drops on the coast. Under those clouds and the sea breeze, Wollongong managed a top of just 22 degrees, 23 at Newcastle, much warmer inland, 29 for Bourke. Troughs and onshore winds will continue to push those few showers onto the coastline in coming days. They will be heaviest in the north though, but over the next 7 days we'll see decent falls accumulate in the south as well. Southwest slopes will see upwards of 25 millimetres, closer to Sydney around 15. Detailed weekend weather details coming up soon, Mark.
OK, Angie, thank you. As many businesses are facing their darkest days, one vital service has a big job. Next, home is where the deliveries are, how Australia Post is meeting new demand. Also, why Cheryl Grimmer's older brother will be spending the next 3 years behind bars. Meghan's mega new role, could she and Harry be relocating to LA? Later, we look at the do's and don'ts of self-quarantine as stricter lockdowns loom. And NRL stars in lockdown as a hefty pay cut looms. Welcome back. The brother of murdered toddler Cheryl Grimmer has been sentenced to 3 years in jail for indecently assaulting a 14-year-old girl. Stephen Grimmer pleaded guilty last year and appeared via video link in a Wollongong court today, where a judge said there was no alternative but to jail him. The 55-year-old was just 6 when his little sister vanished. He'll be eligible for parole in 2 years' time. While most Australian businesses are doing it very tough as this COVID pandemic takes hold, one industry is thriving. With millions of people self-isolating at home, they're turning to delivery services to keep them supplied with the essentials.
With a nation preparing to work from home, Australia Post has its work cut out. In the past 2 weeks, deliveries have jumped by around 10%. Close to 6,000 people have ordered personal lockers, and online sales of stationery and home office supplies have doubled.
We would much prefer business as usual, but as we all are realising, very extraordinary times. So we are encouraged that we're able to step in and fill a void.
The jump in mail demand seeing 13 Cabs pivot its business from passengers to parcels.
Right now the community needs something different. So by being able to rally our troops, our call centres, our technologists and deliver this service through the drivers so that they can continue what really matters to them, which is helping the community function.
Australia Post has been keen to stress it's business as usual for mail and deliveries. The only change, parcels no longer require a signature, only for someone to be home at the time of delivery. The company adding, to date, none of its 8,000 employees have tested positive. Cameron Price, 7 News.
Los Angeles residents were in lockdown were glued to their TVs today as they tuned in to a police chase for more than an hour. A suspected drunk driver got behind the wheel of a minivan and shredded its tyres before the pursuit ended with a bang.
Traffic has been very light. Oh, right here, they're losing control right there. Just hit the attenuator there. Lost control. Let's see what he does, if he's even able to open up the door.
He couldn't. Armed police managed to pull him out of the window and took him into custody. Disney Nature has released 2 new family films for children at home, one giving Meghan Markle her first job outside royal life.
Elephant, narrated by Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, follows one family's extraordinary 1,000-mile journey across Africa.
Perhaps that pitch we overheard to the Disney boss earlier this year worked. It's also being reported that Harry and Meghan have now relocated to LA, crossing the Canadian border before it closed. The NRL says it's impossible right now to rubber stamp a new multi-million-dollar deal for Dragons superstar Tyson Frizell. Jim Wilson is here, and Jim Frizzell's move to Newcastle is not official just yet.
Not yet, Fergo. Good evening to you. Evening, everyone. Both clubs this morning announced Frizzell's intention to leave the Dragons and head to the Knights, but the NRL says there's no way in this global health crisis they can register any new contracts right now. We've got the very latest soon in sport, and we're live to our league expert Brett Camorley at League Central. Plus, the lockdown is on and a pay cut looms what some of our league stars are doing as the season is put on hold. And more team members announced for the Tokyo 2021 Olympics as our athletes reset and come to terms with a 12-month postponement. Another year of training. Also some big news as far as some major league competitions cancelled for the rest of the year. Coming your way very soon.
Talk soon, Jim. Thank you. A century-old tuberculosis vaccine is set for a COVID-19 era return. Up next, why it could protect our frontline health staff. Plus hand sanitisers doing the dirty, how to tell if yours is the real deal. A new look for the law, the changing face of justice in the face of coronavirus. And military might keeping families fed, the army called in to fight this invisible enemy. Welcome back. It's not just sectors such as office work and education that have been forced online by the coronavirus lockdown, but much of our justice system as well. New South Wales Courts has begun live streaming criminal trials where lawyers can cross-examine from their chambers and defendants on bail can watch from home.
From the comfort of his Hunters Hill mansion, Eddie Obeid will make history. His criminal trial in the Supreme Court, the first ever to be live streamed on the internet.
These are extraordinary times, and of course there's no manual on how to deal with these things.
Legally, the proceedings can't be shown on television, but anyone will be able to watch online from home. Open justice in the age of coronavirus.
Every justice matter that can be dealt with is being dealt with as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
New laws were passed this week allowing everyone except the judge to appear via video link. The Supreme and District Courts also given more power to order judge-alone trials, with all new jury trials suspended.
And to have all bail applications dealt with by audio-visual.
Not all Supreme and District Court matters are being streamed online, but they are all being heard in virtual courtrooms. For now, at least, the public can still go to the physical courtroom to watch. The District Court estimates 1,000 criminal trials and civil hearings could be delayed over the next 6 months, while the local court has suspended sentencing for at least 2 months, with all civil matters postponed indefinitely.
The point is that the wheels of justice will continue to turn, albeit a little bit more slowly than we would have hoped that it would be.
Alex Hart, 7 News.
It's no more effective than soap and water, but it's becoming a lot more expensive. Shops across the city are running out of hand sanitizer, prompting some retailers to up their prices. But experts say the latest run on the product is just another example of panic buying.
It's a clean sweep for many small retailers who are running out of hand sanitizer.
No more, not anything.
Washing your hands is the best option. Hand sanitizer is the fallback when you can't use soap and water.
If you're going to go for a hand sanitizer, look for alcohol, and it needs to be a minimum of 60% alcohol.
Tiny bottles are selling for between $10 to $20 each, larger bottles for $50 to $80 each.
The price gouging on essentials like hand sanitizer is disgraceful.
On social media, more panic as this post suggested labels being printed to place on bootleg sanitizer, with no way of knowing what's in it. Scott's is a legitimate brand made by Pasco's at Fairfield. They and other manufacturers are working overtime to increase supply. Here are a few things you can look out for. If the bottle has a tamper seal, it was made in a factory and far less likely to be fake. Also check it has an ingredients panel. Most use alcohol and have chemicals like ethanol and propanol. And you can also check for the manufacturer's details. And if you're still in doubt, check with the source. Experts warn against trying to make your own hand sanitizer.
Getting the alcohol concentration is incredibly hard to get right.
Brian Seymour, 7 News.
A century-old vaccine could protect Australian healthcare workers on the front line. 4,000 doctors and nurses will trial the tuberculosis vaccine as a way to boost their immunity in these dangerous times.
Doctors and nurses risk their own lives to save ours. Now there might be a way to protect them as they fight coronavirus on the front line.
There are recent reports of up to 20% of healthcare workers being infected with the COVID-19 virus. Very important that we do everything we can to protect our healthcare workers.
Researchers in Melbourne believe the century-old tuberculosis vaccine could also guard against coronavirus. The vaccine is safe and currently administered to 13 million children worldwide. Critically, those who've received it show a defence against viral respiratory tract infections, a common symptom of COVID-19.
We now understand that this vaccine trains the immune system. It has particular effect on what we call innate immunity, which is the frontline defence against a variety of different viruses and bacteria.
From next week, 4,000 Australian hospital staff will take part in a trial of the vaccine. Their conditions will be monitored for 6 months. The results of the trial may not be known in time for the peak of the crisis here in Australia, but it could still be rolled out overseas in countries where the virus is yet to take off. Vital protection for life-saving workers. Jodie Lee, 7 News.
The Army is now being called in to ensure food and other essential supplies get to the Australians who need them the most. We've been given an exclusive look at how the Defence Force is helping charities who are now under enormous pressure due to panic buying.
The might of the military keeping our most vulnerable families fed.
As you can see behind us, we bring a lot of manpower.
Army reservists reporting for duty at Foodbank's distribution centre in Glendenning.
They understand discipline, they understand order.
Packing boxes, stacking shelves.
It's not something we're used to as a Department of Defence, but it's something we do plan for.
Part of a critical charity relief effort in this complex war.
There was a clear and present danger which most people could see in relation to the bushfires, whereas COVID-19 is obviously not right in front of you until it actually hits you.
The Defence Force now stepping up, helping the states and territories manage logistics, answering telephones at call centres and keeping businesses open. The state government today giving Foodbank a $2 million boost so it can supply more than 1,000 charities.
We will be the epicentre of all food relief in New South Wales.
Volunteers no longer required.
Their first mission to put together 35,000 of these emergency rations packs containing enough food and essentials for 2 weeks.
So we'll have breakfast cereal, UHT milk, pasta, rice, all of those sort of things that you can make a meal.
Ensuring what's essential in society carries on. Serena Andaloro, 7 News.
Great effort. So many families are trying to work and study from home, but some don't have the technology to cope. Up next, how one business is lending a helping hand. Plus, end of an era, Qantas forced to ground its 747 fleet, see its last hurrah over the harbour. Sharing the burden, the Good Samaritan, who handed out hundreds in a Centrelink line.
And a beautiful day ahead tomorrow to start the weekend. Your local forecast is next.
As we reported earlier, it was a turbulent end to the week for the Australian share market. The ASX down 271 points. Most of the gains of the past few days were wiped out Blue chip stocks took a big hit. The big banks plunged while BHP also suffered heavy falls. But the Aussie dollar has risen, buying 61.04 US cents. Fuel prices are falling across Sydney heading into the weekend. The average is $1.24.4 a litre, but we found regular unleaded for just 87.9 cents at Fairfield. The last Qantas 747 has touched down in Sydney, marking the end of an era. This is QF26 flying in from Japan this morning. After 50 years of service, Qantas is retiring its remaining jumbos, with 7 left in the fleet. But almost all of its international planes have already been grounded. There are some services still operating for the next week or so, but after that there won't be any international Qantas flights for months. With more people working from home, office equipment has been in high demand, but some students are now in isolation without computers. It's an extra expense many families simply can't afford right now. They're relying on the generosity of the community.
It's a geography excursion where you don't have to leave the house.
Oh, yeah.
Put on by Sydney Olympic Park.
We have been able to continue the learning of those students and provide a resource to teachers through these virtual excursions.
The classroom might look empty, but this science teacher is engaging with dozens of students online.
There's one more component I'm looking for. So we've got heart, blood vessels.
We have created innovative learning experiences.
But there are many students who don't have access to a computer at home, whose families simply aren't in a position to fork out for one right now.
Here's a computer for you to use for your studying while you're not at university.
Wow, thank you so much.
No, it's really welcome.
It's going to help you so much.
Great.
Kevin Cohen has been bombarded with pleas from parents for laptops and iPads.
3 or 4 kids trying to share one device, or one mum said that they were all trying to use, the kids were trying to use her iPhone.
Now urging big businesses to get involved.
I'm really hoping that there's some companies are going to say, okay, well, we've got, 20, 30, 50 PCs that are just not being used right now.
Visit our website if you can help. Jessica Ridley, 7 News.
A warm-hearted cafe owner is being hailed a modern-day saint. He was so moved by the long lines at Centrelink, he decided to share some of his wealth.
Started at the back of the queue and just basically handed everybody a $100 note, or lettuce leaf as I call it.
The man known only as Generous Pete was forced to lay off 12 staff when his own cafe closed. Tighter restrictions on our movements are looking increasingly likely, with some, if not all, Sydney suburbs set for a total lockdown. So, how exactly will it work? The do's and don'ts of self-isolation? Don't miss that story soon on 7 News. But now Jim is back with sport, and the Knights hoping to snare a very big name.
They are, Fergo. Coming up, Tyson Frizzell wants out of the Dragons and wants to head to Newcastle next season, but there's a major hurdle. Details next. Plus, breaking news on major rugby league competitions here and in Queensland that have serious implications for the NRL. And the world's most famous cycle race ready to take extreme measures for the event to go ahead. Welcome back, everyone. Dragons superstar Tyson Frizzell wants out of the Red V and believes Newcastle has a playing roster that can win a premiership. But the 3-year deal at the Knights from next season is far from finalised, with the NRL declaring they can't register any new contracts in the current environment.
He's the Red V's best player, but Tyson Frizzell wants out and a fresh start in Newcastle from 2021.
Wherever he goes, you're going to get someone that's going to do everything he can to win games and to try and win a competition.
We offered an extremely good offer. It was over a period of time that suited him, but also most importantly, it was marquee money.
After 9 years at the helm, Frizzell took to social media today declaring he was on the move. But he also conceded a major hurdle if the deal is to happen. I have signed and agreed to terms, but due to current circumstances, it has not been registered. There are more pressing priorities at the moment, so with respect to the media and fans, I'd like to make no further comment. He'll relocate here in Newcastle on a multi-million-dollar deal. There's a chance he could have played his last game for St George Illawarra if the current season doesn't recommence. And his teammates love the thought of injecting another New South Wales and Australian powerhouse into their forward pack.
Frizzell.
The Dragons say the loss will free up vital funds to sign another star player.
We can provide a substantial amount of money into those positions now that Tyson's knocked back what we call a very big offer.
While other league stars are getting used to lockdowns, a tough day looms on Monday and the prospect of huge pay cuts. In Newcastle, Michelle Bishop, 7 News.
OK, let's go live to our league expert, Brett Kamali. Brett, good evening to you. The deal isn't done yet for Tyson Frizzell, but if it happens, gee, it's a big blow, isn't it, to the Dragons?
Yeah, it is, Jim. It's a massive kick in the guts for the Dragons. Their best player wanting to walk out of the football club. Normally a player leaves because he doesn't believe in them as the future, or he generally leaves for family reasons. And we know Tyson Frizzell played for the Sharks before going to the Dragons, so his family is well and truly settled in Sydney. So, strange move.
Now, news just in, 9 major competitions have just been cancelled by the New South Wales Rugby League, including the Premier Canterbury Cup and others, including Juicy Flegg Cup for under-20s, also the SG Ball Cup for 18s, and the Queensland Cup also shelved for the entire year. That's got a big impact, hasn't it, on the NRL as feeder clubs for some of those clubs?
Yeah, you're right, Jim. There'll be certainly some men and some junior players, development-wise, that'll certainly affect the pathways going forward into the NRL. There's a whole 12 months of development they're going to miss, so it's huge, huge news. And obviously also the ladies' competition. There will be a lot of ladies sitting on the sideline this year wanting to know how to get better.
Yeah, well, women's and, as I mentioned, Canterbury Cup and also Queensland Cup impacted by that decision, cancelled for 2020. Brett Kamali, thanks for your time tonight. With the rest of the sporting world at a standstill, racing will go on in Australia tomorrow. After jockey Mark Zahra was cleared of contracting coronavirus, racing was allowed to go on, including a big day at Rosehill Gardens with the Group 1 Tancred Stakes and Vinery Stud Stakes. Gay Waterhouse's training partner, Adrian Bott, returns a week after winning his first Golden Slipper. They have Shout the Bar running in the Vinery.
Big ask in her first campaign, very understanding of that. But look, as I said, she hasn't taken a backward step.
All the racing will be live and free on 7 tomorrow afternoon. Just days after the Games were officially postponed, Australia's canoe sprint team was named today. The Australian Olympic Committee has guaranteed the selection of all athletes already qualified or nominated. That's a huge relief for Narrabeen's Joe Brigden-Jones, who missed Rio due to injury and is putting training on hold to return to work as a paramedic.
If we can all stand together and do the right thing for the next few weeks, it's going to make such a massive difference, and hopefully we'll be out of this crisis in no time.
Bernadette Wallace, the sister of Beijing gold medalist Ken, missed Rio to fight melanoma and is headed for her first Olympic Games. Congratulations. One of sport's most famous events is trying to avoid being next on the coronavirus cancellation list. Tour de France organisers are considering plans to go ahead without crowds. The 2020 route will cover nearly 3,500 kilometres through French cities, villages and countryside. It's scheduled to start on June 27. One of the last world sporting events still running is now off as well. The prestigious Chess Candidates tournament was close to the end, with 8 players battling for a shot at the world champion. But Russia is shutting its borders and the international players had to leave the country in a hurry. But fear not, everyone. In Belarus, life and football goes on, even with crowds allowed in to watch the Premier Division. Now, the president ordered play to continue, so they're doing just that, but with temperature spot checks on spectators. We'll be keeping you in touch with what happens in Belarus football in coming days. I look forward to everyone's company on Weekend Sunrise tomorrow morning.
My temperature goes up when my team's losing.
Oh, sure.
Good on you, Jim.
Okay.
A full-scale lockdown in Sydney is looking more likely, but what exactly does that mean and how will you be impacted? Seven's Melissa Doyle has been looking at how other countries are handling it to get a better understanding of what we could expect here.
As COVID-19 spreads throughout the globe, the world's biggest cities are shutting down to flatten the curve. But what does a full lockdown look like? In New York, the city that never sleeps is taking a rest. The rules for residents are simple. If you're not an essential worker, stay home. You can only go outside to get groceries or medicine and do some quick exercise. In London, it's a similar story. For the next 3 weeks at least, Brits can dash to the shops for basic necessities. Banks and post offices are also open and you can still get dinner delivered. But the emphasis is on social distancing. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson put it bluntly, if your friends ask you to meet, you should say no. There is no getting around it. A lockdown here will be the biggest disruption to daily life many of us will ever experience. But
Here is why it works. This model from the University of Sydney shows the spread of COVID-19 if only 70% of Australians practice strict social distancing. In short, the virus will continue to spread. But have a look at what happens if 80% stay home. And now, 90%. With strict social distancing, 3 months is all it could take to get the virus under control. A lockdown makes it far more likely we will reach that 90% and come out the other side sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Mel. Coming up, Angie Asimus has the forecast. Angie, we're in for a treat tomorrow.
It is looking like the pick of the week, Mark. Fine and warm before the showers return on Sunday. Your 7-day forecast is next.
The definitive source, keeping you totally informed.
Lockdown very much on the cards.
Turn to 7 News at 6.
Tonight, 7 News headlines. The Army will help enforce a mandatory quarantine on all overseas arrivals, with thousands of hotel rooms set aside to house them. Dozens of cruise ship passengers have been allowed into Sydney unchecked, while travellers from a sister ship remain in strict lockdown. Police are on patrol across Sydney, handing fines to anyone breaching social distancing rules and isolation orders. And Woolies advertises 20,000 jobs to help struggling Aussie workers stood down from other companies and combat the growing numbers of unemployed. Now, with the very latest on Sydney's weather, here's Angie.
Thanks very much, Mark. Well, the weekend will be off to a fine start tomorrow. Warm temperatures, partly cloudy conditions for Sydney. Not too dissimilar to today's conditions. In fact, we reached a pleasant top of 23.9 degrees in the CBD. That happened fairly early in the day too, just after midday. Across the suburbs, the east was actually warmer than the west. Manly climbed to a top of 24 degrees, while it was 22 at Richmond. A little chilly up in the mountains, though, with Katoomba recording just 14 degrees. From the satellite, there's still a fair bit of patchy cloud about the state at the moment. Not producing much in the way of rainfall since 9 a.m, just a few coastal showers. Tomorrow, a trough and those easterly winds will continue to fuel more showers, although they'll be mainly focused on the north coast and southern inland centres to remain fine. Around the nation for your Saturday now, Brisbane, showers, 27 degrees. Very settled in the south, though fine for Canberra. A warm and sunny one for Melbourne, 27 degrees. Hobart too, aiming for 26. And that burst of heat to hit Adelaide as well, with 30 degrees expected. Statewide, most centres remain fine, with the exception of the central to north coast. There we could see up to 15 millimetres in the gauge. We're expecting another fine, warm day across Sydney. So, under partly cloudy skies, we're looking at pleasant temperatures. 23 is the forecast top for Manly and Hornsby as well. 25 at Camden, with just a light shower likely to develop during the afternoon on the central coast and across in the Blue Mountains as well. On the water tomorrow, winds will run in an east-southeasterly direction at first, around 10 to 15 knots, before swinging around to the north by the afternoon. For the CBD, beautiful start to the weekend here, a low of 17 and a top of 25, spot on average for this time of year. To the week ahead, from about Sunday, those showers are back. The falls will be light and they'll last most of the week. Temperatures also looking pretty good, staying around the mid-20s, getting up to 28 by this time next week. Importantly, beautiful Saturday in store for us, Mark.
Yes, Ange, a very different weekend on the way. That is 7 News for this Friday. The latest is coming up now, and our next 7 News bulletin is at 9:30. I'm Mark Ferguson. Have a great night.